here record. Welcome to Pax Europiana, the podcast about peace and prosperity in Europe. I'm very honored today to welcome a very special guest, the father of European SME, small and medium enterprise policy, a member of the European Parliament for 23 years, and from Austria, from Upper Austria, my home region, Dr. Paul Ruebig. I'm very honored to welcome you at our video channel and podcast today. And I would like you to introduce yourself and also present you to the audience. Thanks a lot, Paul, for coming to the show. The floor is yours.
Yes, welcome, Günther. I'm always very happy to meet you. We worked very well together on European level in the area of SME policy. You as Secretary General and me as a President of SME Union, and later on together with SME Europe, we tried to get SME policy onto the political level. And I myself, I'm a blacksmith. I'm coming out of a family business. And as a blacksmith, of course, I had also vocational training, but then I went to an engineering school. From the engineering school for agricultural and engine manufacturing, I studied business administration. Between this, I was in the army at the Alpine region, very interesting time. And then my thesis on international patent and license policy. I published also a book on this agenda because I was in my company very active in new inventions. So I filed also my own patents, and therefore I was very interested how to make a business case out of it. And that worked quite well. And from this stage, I started to export our products from the forging industry. I opened a company in Germany, and we also opened a company in France. We were quite active in Great Britain and around the world, a lot of shows around the world. And so I came to a vocational training unit as a dean, called WIFI in Upper Austria. We had approximately 1,200 people who were lecturing, and approximately 50,000 people every year who got these lectures in practical vocational training mainly. And this was the way to the Chamber of Commerce. I got the vice president of the Chamber of Commerce. And then I came into the regional legislative assembly in Upper Austria, where I started to be the chair of the European Integration Committee. At this time, Austria was not in the European Union. And for me, it was always a real troubleshooting way to cross the border from Austria to Germany. We are all the customs declarations, and I really hated this loss of time and value. So I thought whenever it's possible to get rid of the border control, that's the right thing to do. So I had, I think, more than 250 meetings in Upper Austria, every evening a debate with the one who are in favor or against the European Union. And then, of course, we had this big success that 2/3 of our people decided to be member of European Union. And that was one of my happiest day, as we have lifted the border to Czech Republic. And the people went away from the border. That was really a great story. And that also gave me the power to work on and to see how we could improve the work which we do together. I was a short time then in the national parliament, and I was delegated in 1995 from the Austrian national parliament to the European Parliament, where I started in 1996 in January, and started a quite good career because I had a good luck that one of the leaders of our Austrian groups was going back to Austria. So I got his functions in the different committees. And so I came into the budget committee and in the committee with United States, and also in the ITRE committee. And it was quite interesting that I also started in the trade committee. So I had a very wide and broad function. And that was really nice to have, because what I never thought, how much a single member could move.
Also, in '95, it was the referendum to join the European Union for Austria. And this was also you come from a region, Upper Austria, which is so close to Bavaria and to Germany. How important was this membership in the European Union for you, for your business? And what was your contribution to the referendum in Upper Austria?
As an example, the export of agricultural products since 1995 is now tenfold bigger than before. So a lot of costs which we had in cross-border trading were diminished. So also for my own company, it was not necessary anymore to have our own company in Germany. So we put back our activities to Austria, and could deliver to Germany without any problem. And as you know, in 2000, we got the euro, and I was also one of the big fighters for getting a united currency. And so also the introduction of the euro diminished the cost and the risk strategy. So bringing people together and create a real internal market was one of the top priorities. And I think we got it because at least an integrated market is the best base for competition, and competition is only working for consumers. So consumers will benefit if a transparent competition will happen, that the best products and best services could be freely chosen. And I think that are the principles which we should work on also in the future to get better results for the consumers.
So it's now 26 years that Upper Austria is in the European Union. Would you see, because you know the economic sector and reality of Upper Austria very well, many of the companies, how you judge it? Was it a very big success for the Upper Austrian economy?
Yes, of course. The trade activities rose dramatically. So I think 60% of the products which we produce are now exported. So it led to a very high income for our employees. A lot of new startup companies were with big success bringing new products to the markets. And also through import, we gained a lot of success because the value chain improved in a very good way. And you know, import gives you cheaper and better products. That means it's increasing the buying power of people. And export through high wages, which you can gain through export, you increase the buying power twice. So export import is a success story because the global value chain keeps market active and keeps the competition active, and so everybody could benefit. That was also the reason why I started to take care on the WTO development. You know, WTO was starting in 1995, and I was one of the members of European Parliament who tried to be in any of these ministerials of the WTO. And I was also the founder with a German member of the European Parliament. We founded the parliamentary conference to the WTO. And in the last session, which I took place, I was chairman of this WTO parliamentary group. And we had approximately 400 members of parliament from around the world to be also part of giving WTO a chance to be successful and to give good solutions.
Paul, in '96, when you started then in the European Parliament, can you tell a bit how that was? and also if there was a lot of talk about small, medium enterprises on the European level already when you came in the parliament?
The main problem is that not many members of parliament are coming out of the business world. And I'm, as an engineer and as business orientated, I started to ask always questions about how we can help SMEs. And you know, SMEs are up to 250 people in a company. And in 1995, we started with SME Union together with our Austrian Minister of Economy, Mr. Mitterlehner, and Carla Pace and Marianne Thyssen, who later on got, as a commissioner, a lot of influence. And SME Union, we did a lot of activities with big congress in the parliament, with a lot of public relation. And one of the biggest success which we had, that we got Jacques Santer, the former commission president, as president of the SME Union, and that increased also the influence of fighting for SME interests. And of course, we have to see that there's always a battle between taxation and profit. And of course, both is important, but we should look how the consumers will benefit from the gain which we have out of different activities. And I think what we need in future is a more consumer-oriented internal market, where we should look for the taxpayer, because 100% of the consumers are taxpayers as well. And so reduction of taxation will play a key role in the future positive development.
In 2000, after 4 years when you were in the European Parliament, there was already a big debate about the Lisbon agenda and to turn Europe in the most competitive and most successful economic area of the world. And also your leadership was decisive to create the EU Charter for SMEs already as part of this Lisbon agenda. Can you talk a bit about what was exactly the context, and do you see this as a successful process?
Yes, I think we started with think small first. That was one of the headlines which we created, because in economic terms, of course, the big companies were always on stage and had organized quite good lobbying, not so good as NGOs, but anyways, they are quite good in lobbying. But, you know, a normal SME, an entrepreneur, has to work day and night, because he has to paint the wall, he has to cut the wood. So they have not really time for political engagement. And so it's much more important to convince the administration of the Commission to take care on SMEs and to fight for the interests of the SMEs, because at least they're paying 80% of the tax. They create 50% of the GDP, and they employ 2/3 of the workforce. So if we look who creates new jobs, also SME are in the front. More than 80% of new jobs created in Europe is in the SME area. So having a strong SME policy is the best backbone also for the big international companies, because for the supply chain, the services of SMEs play a crucial role. And a good and harmonized strategy on small business and big international companies. We want to have this Friends of SME group in the future also as important step to understand that only if we work together in a productive way, we can pay some taxation, and we need the help for public administration, of course, for all the infrastructure, for the health and for the research and science. And so a good working together between the private and the public sector is crucial.
In the year 2000, you were elected as the president of the SME Union, Small Medium Enterprises of the European People's Party. And then it was, of course, the preparation of the big enlargement round of 2004. And you were very active to help many of the transition countries to prepare for a European Union, but also to develop SME policy in Croatia and Slovakia. Maybe you can talk about your experience as president of SME Union now.
Yes, in Parliament, I also was at this time the chairman of the working group together with Slovakia. So I was in charge of Bratislava. We had a lot of meetings with our friends in Bratislava. As I still remember, Jan Figel, who later on got commissioner in the European Commission. And with Michael Zorinda, the prime minister, I met him in his first campaign where he ran against the old communistic system. He was running on a bike from city to city, and it was a big issue as we met. And I really tried to help him to get a successful election campaign. And I was quite astonished as I met him afterwards as prime minister to see how important it is that people are engaged. Today he is the president of a think tank in Brussels, the Martin Center. And so the way in uniting the new member states was also a success story because from the day one they were fully integrated and implemented within European Union, in the Council, in the Commission, in the Parliament, and were on equal foot with everybody. And therefore, the strategy to get new members through an attractive program, you know, it's not only the internal market, it's also the structures and strategies which are done from European Union. Gave them a solid background, and we have seen that all of these new countries had big success, like Austria. And if you see how the cities have changed and the people gained on value, that's remarkable. And therefore, the work with also starting SME organizations in these countries, we did a lot in Croatia, in Slovenia. Today, Janez Janša is the Prime Minister of Slovenia. We have seen a lot of very positive development in bringing people together, trying to understand each other, being tolerant, and most important thing, to have respect between the people.
On the 1st of May 2004, and there were 10 new countries joining the European Union. Can you tell if this was a very successful and important moment for Austrian economy and for Austria itself? And also, do you think that enlargement was a success?
Yes, you know, we got rid of all the borders with our eastern member states. And that was, of course, a big event. I still remember the pan-European picnic which we had on the border to Hungary, where at least it was the first big step to open the border. And now what we never thought, also with Eastern Germany, that the borders are gone. It was really making feeling good to see that we are united Europeans, that we fight together for our interests, and that we're not going into the trap of poverty, which of course a lot of the left want to have. I think that communism is not the right way to help the consumers, and I'm therefore very much orientated to respect what consumers want to have. And we know a lot of people are against market economy, and we have seen in the world that a free market economy brings benefit to the people and not to a small elite.
Paul, as a president of the SME Union of European People's Party, you always also had the idea to bring the idea of and the concept of jobs, growth, prosperity via SMEs to the global level. And then you also negotiated with the International Democratic Union, with the center-right-wing parties of the world association, to organize and establish SME Global. Can you describe the process and also the achievements of this SME Global network?
Yes, if you can remember, we were together in London, where you introduced me to John Howard, the Prime Minister of Australia. And he himself, he is also an entrepreneur out of his education and profile. And he asked me, Paul, you have created SME Union in Europe. Why not create something around the world? I would give you full support from the IDO, from the International Democratic Union. Please make it happen that we get an organization also within IDO who fights for SME interests. And I can remember some years later, I met him in his office in Australia, and we had a nice debate on who should be the next Secretary General of the WTO. And I knew Pascal Lamy quite well, and he was our Commissioner for Trade in these days. And so I had a very intensive talk to give support to Pascal Lamy, because first of all, he is French, so he knows one of the most important countries quite well. He knew the agricultural sector quite well and was not out of agriculture. So we came in a very deep debate, and I think we had more than 1 hour debate on WTO, which at least in the later time, I've learned that Pascal Lamy then was elected as Secretary General of WTO. And he brought also with a new slogan, trade activities to the globe, with the slogan, everything but arms. So to give development countries a chance to deliver to the European market and develop a sound structure also in the developing world was one of his big successes. And we are all very thankful to Pascal Lamy that he really had a very effective time in the WTO.
In the framework of SME Global, you were also in the so-called Cancun meeting of WTO. And it was also in this framework where you established a network of parliamentarians with Mexico, with America, and also to really bring the SME agenda in the WTO. How successful was that?
Yes, I started in Seattle with the first WTO meeting, which was really ended by a chaotic demonstrator war on the street, where Albright and the president wanted to come to the meeting, but at least they denied. And it was a real disaster. So it's sometimes quite good to start with a disaster. Because then we had the Doha conference, where the Doha agenda was decided, where also China got a member of the WTO, and also in Cancun, where the negotiations started, but they had a breakdown, where I had a lunch with Commissioner Fischler. And during the lunch, one of his secretary came and said, sorry, but the trade minister decided to end the meeting because he doesn't think that it will be successful. These were all my learnings that at another conference which we had in Malaysia, where we tried to understand that we have to negotiate till a result is on the table. And these negotiations day and night were quite successful. So together with India, we got a new framework. And so I think WTO needs a strong backup, and also the education and information of parliamentarians out of all political groups around the world is a very, very important issue. That's also why I started together with my German friend with the International Parliamentarian Organization in Geneva. We started a cooperation to have this parliamentary conference of the WTO.
Also, during your time as SME Global President, you took very close care to work together with the American partners in the US Congress. And you had one counterpart, he was also for SMEs, Mr. Manzullo in the House of Representatives. And can you describe in this very important time after September 11, how you especially took care about the relations with the United States? And also you were invited to the White House at one meeting, and maybe to describe this for the audience.
Yes, you know, with Don Manzullo, I had a very close friend. He was the chairman of the small and medium-sized committee. And he was also very interested because he himself was an employer as well. He had a machine shop in United States. And he was very good in understanding the issues of SMEs. And he worked also together with South Korea in a very engaged way. And also, of course, we met Dick Cheney after this horrible attack on the towers. And Dick Cheney in this meeting in the press room told us that there will be a counterattack, and we were quite astonished that this was planned. And also for European Union, it was a clear way that we stay on democratic and debating soft power using strategies and not military equipment. So it was quite impressive, this long talk in the White House. And of course, we had understood how important this issue was. But at least we had not the same opinion on how to solve this crisis.
So you were also the president of SME Circle, and that's the parliamentarian network inside the European Parliament. And let's talk about some of your legislative achievements for SMEs. This was so important, especially I think many of our listeners will know you as Mr. Roaming, because you achieved so much breakthrough for cheaper telephone charges in all of the European Union. Maybe you can describe these achievements.
Yes, I had a complaint from a young student from the university in Linz, which visited the European Parliament. And, you know, I did my normal talk with them. And in the afternoon, they went back to the hotel. And from her hotel room, she found the friend in Munich. And it was a short talk, as she said. But afterwards, she got the bill, which was really, really high, and nobody could understand why this bill was so high. And then she learned that the tariff at home is not working in Brussels. And if you get a phone call from Brussels to Munich and not to Austria, it's, I think, 72 times higher than at home. So she paid a very high bill and complained and said, Mr. Ruebig, you told us about internal market, but there is no internal telecom market. And I said, yes, you're right. So I asked Viviane Reding, the commissioner in charge of telecom, to have a coffee together. And I explained the case, and she immediately was on fire. She said, yes, we fight together. That's where we have to make legislation. And so we started to do legislation on roaming. It was quite complicated. We started, and I had some very new approaches on this, because first of all, we started that the legislation should be only active for 3 years. 3 years means it had a sunset clause. then we started to put a top level on the tariffs, where underneath the top level competition could be possible, but didn't happen afterwards. And we had a clear way to communicate that this first step should open a free market and competition. But the market companies didn't deliver. So we started with the second legislation. And so every 3 years, we got deeper and deeper into this telecom world. And at least it was the start of the digital single market. And so I'm happy that I started more or less the legislation on the digital single market. And still today, we are still again debating roaming for international trade agreements, because also reciprocity should be take care on lower the tariffs in the international market, especially with the data volume. You know, I changed the legislation base price from megabit to gigabit, because that has a very big impact onto the price which you show. And since that, we got gigabit, and it was very interesting to see that the negotiations in the trilogue with the council, with the telecom ministers, was always very effective when we are in front of elections, because if elections were on the door, telecoms minister were more flexible than at other times.
Well, this was major achievement for SMEs to make, and for consumers in general, to make telephoning and telecommunications easier and better accessible in the European internal market. Also, you were awarded twice as the best MEP for innovation and research. And that's also so important for SMEs. Can you describe your activities in research and technology, where many of the things you were promoting in 2004 were already then later 10 years reality for many of the consumers? And in the start in 2004, many people didn't believe you, all these technology options, and now they are reality. Can you describe some of these activities?
Yes, we had a wide range of activities, you know, starting on global level and coming down to the SME area. I always said it's a bottom-up and a top-down strategy necessary to achieve the best results. And as an example, I also in the research area started a debate with the European Commission, because all this research funding were starting for more than 10 million euros. And, you know, 10 million euros is a big, much too big amount for SMEs. So I started to ask the Commission if it's not possible to give it to third parties, maybe 300 or 400 million, and this third party can then go into the detail with acting very quick, making it as simple as possible. All these things which normally the Commission couldn't do. And so we started with the Eurostars program and developed this program where SMEs with more than 10% on research from the turnover got grants and support through this Eurostars program. And at least Eureka took it over, the Eurostars program, and that's one of the biggest success which we have. Now billions of investment and a lot of jobs were created through this program. We had now an anniversary on this program, where we have seen that taking initiative and bringing forward the world of SMEs to the political decision makers, that this really can bring good success.
This was very important for SMEs, obviously, innovation support and being accessible, this funding from the European level. Let me talk also about and ask about the trade policy, because the European Union is a WTO notified trade integration system. And one of the key tools, and you were also in the Committee for Trade, is obviously free trade agreements. And there were recently major successes, as the agreement with Japan, with South Korea, with Vietnam, and many others which you were also personally involved in the negotiations. And can you talk about the biggest successes in the conclusion for free trade agreements with the European Union and what they mean for SMEs in Europe?
Yes, before 1995, the GATT agreement was the base for international trade. And so the start of the WTO in Geneva gave us a platform to have international cooperation. And this international cooperation was also quite important because the Singapore issues, which were the base of a framework, legislative framework for trade, were in upfront of our debate. So to get step-by-step regulations which can help the value chains to grow and to get rid of poverty in a lot of countries, and at least the WTO, where China stepped in, has shown that more than 400 million people only in China came out of poverty through the international trade. And I remember in the first days in 1995 onwards, the Chinese were very skeptical about international trade and more or less against. And then if they've learned how the WTO works, and after the Doha round, they started to use these global value chains. And now there's a real defender of the WTO. So we have with China now a real positive partner in giving a big chance to the global value chain and to deliver these activities. And so the big question of trade facilitation also was something where we worked a long time on it, to have the customs administrative around the world with strategic rules to make it possible without corruption to do the right trade activities. And this was also a substantial part of the success stories which we had within WTO. And at least I gained a lot of friends around the world who are still active in trade activities, and where we see that if you have some engagement, you can push also global development.
In the 23 years of your membership in the parliament from 96 to 2019, you saw a lot of free trade agreements concluded by the European Union, and it was a very successful period. What is your take on the pending issues, because there are three of them? This is Mercosur, and the question also with the American agreement with TTIP, but also the agreement with China. You are no longer a member of the European Parliament, but what is your recommendation? What do you think should be done with these three major agreements?
The principal decision is, do we like to have trade war or trade agreement? So for the European Union, it's clear agreements are much better than trade war, because trade war, the price has always to be paid by the consumers, and trade agreements, the gain and the profit is with the consumers. So we learned with South Korea that export and import rose up by more than 30%, created a lot of jobs in Korea and in European Union. We have learned that these trade agreements give also a plain level field, like the internal market. At least this issue, we have to see what we could learn out of the internal market of European Union, opening the borders, giving a positive relation between the acting people. And this openness at least leads to a win-win situation, because you only do a trade agreement if both sides are sure that they will win. So I'm a total supporter of trade agreements. We also see that now agriculture is exporting more than importing. So also for the one who want to block these activities, I only can give them the advice to go into the depths and to learn what's within these trade agreements. anyway, the specialists who are doing the daily negotiations, they know that it's a win-win situation. But I think we have a lot of fake news in this area, which are coming from outside of the trade negotiations area, which want to hinder the successful work together. And therefore, this disinformation in this area is very harmful. And of course, some of the politicians are not in the depths of the negotiations, and they don't trust their own team too much. So I think it's necessary for better information to the people who make the decision, and especially for journalists, because also for them sometimes it's very complicated to understand how this agreement works. But the practical term is that I'm very much in favor for doing these agreements in a very transparent and open way, that everybody can understand how important it is to create win-win situations and not to provocate a trade war.
You were one of the key supporters of the agreement with Canada. That was a major achievement. And now my question is, do you support also Mercosur, FTA with and the ratification? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, of course. I think on expert level, it's negotiated over years. So any detail is planned, is checked, has a solid base. So and there's a mandate which was given by the Council for all these negotiations. So I think it's definitely highest time to just conclude and to put it into reality. We need these trade agreements because it puts up the standards from the countries where we live together. And also on our side, we have to change our standards into higher and better standards. So it's a benefit for both sides. And of course, any agreement should be dynamic. The world is changing pretty quick. So the issues are changing, the framework is changing. So we need a lively WTO, also with WTO function to get rid of conflicts. So I think these functions will help us to get not the trade war to a military conflict, and keeping a good progress on trade agreements is substantial for the peace in the world.
That's very important. This podcast is about peace in Europe, so very much this is important in the world as well. Let me ask you also, Paul, about the situation with America, because we have a free trade agreement now as European Union with about half the world, over 70 countries and territories. That's major success. But we unfortunately still don't have free trade agreement with United States of America. Whenever we are so close, historically, they have helped us so much on many ways. What is the issues, basically? Why do you think TTIP didn't work at that time? And do you support a new start with the American states under President Biden now? Do you think it's possible? And what's your take on that?
You know, at least it's a conflict. Should we have a general framework out of WTO, which was the first step where we thought after 1995 that with WTO we can build global frameworks for international trade. But we learned that this wouldn't work. So we took the second best chance. We started to give trade agreements a priority. And of course, in trade agreements, you can be much more detailed and you can go much more to the depths of the real issues. And I think that was a good decision, that we should keep any trade agreement open for all other partners. And I think especially with the United States, it would be a big success for the democratic world if we together create a framework which makes it transparent and efficient for the industry and for the trade activities. And therefore, hopefully the new government in United States will come back to this TTIP negotiations, and we also should have a concept against the misinformation and disinformation about this kind of agreements. And so the public strategy on the information of the people should be also an important part of the negotiation to see how we could explain the importance of this kind of trade agreement to a broad public, and fight the disinformation in an efficient way.
Dr. Ruebig, Paul, I would like to ask you also about China, because that's such a big market. It has really developed from 1 trillion to 14 trillion now in 20 years in the WTO. And there is now recently an agreement with China agreed from the European Council to make the market access for European SMEs easier in China. This is called the China Agreement on Investment. It's not a free trade agreement, but it's a first step to have a better market access for the European SMEs. What do you think about this agreement? Should it be ratified? Is it important?
I think investment agreements are crucial because we have seen that Chinese could buy and sell in Europe quite easy, but for European countries it was not too easy to get market access. So this investment agreement, I think, is a first very important step that we can stay part of the global value chain. You know, we have a lot of scientists, and also Dr. Leitl, the president of Chamber of Commerce on European level, and the chairman of Global Platform of Chamber of Commerce. He also said in 2049, China hopefully or maybe the number one in global trade. So I think we should, as early as possible, try to be part of this value chain of global trade, and therefore it's quite crucial to get in deeper negotiations with China, and I have a very positive feeling the Chinese are very willing to accept our biggest market in the world. You know, European Union has a very good base of being a good partner, and that's important for both sides. So we really should develop a strategy how to keep the public opinion informed in a very objective and future-orientated way. And therefore, I also supported in European Parliament the creation of the so-called Science Media Hub, where we try to give qualified information to science journalists to see that the scientific evidence on these issues are also communicated in a professional way. And as chairman of the so-called STOA committee, STOA is Scientific Technology Options Assessment, together with this new Science Media Hub, we try to get better understanding also on the political level for scientific and research issues. And I'm quite proud that this also grew to the European Parliament Research Service, where we now employ, I think, approximately 300 independent interdisciplinary scientists, which publish peer-reviewed documents for better information about activities of European Union. And that was also a big success. And I was also long time in the budget committee, and I also was rapporteur on the budget in the Austrian presidency, where we also put 1 billion into the area of research and Erasmus Plus and SME financing. So if you are active in your role, and that's of course the positive side on the work as parliamentarian, you have a 70 to 80 hour week where you can do a lot of positive negotiations and you really get impact into legislative decision making. And I think that's a real success story.
Paul, let me ask you about your time in the Budget Committee and about your work for European taxpayers. Was it complicated to fight for European taxpayers and for good use of money on the European level?
Yes, it's also a question how you run through the hierarchy of these negotiations. And of course, in the very early beginning, you start with going into the depths of the documents. And that's what I learned as I was in the Upper Austrian Legislative Assembly, where I had forgotten the budget of the Upper Austrian government in my boot, in my car. And as I was in holiday in Italy, on Sundays we had no newspapers. So I came back to this budget, which were, I think, I don't know how many thousand pages. And I started to read the budget. And how longer I read the budget, how more interesting it was. So I showed some circles on some figures and was prepared for the negotiations on the budget in autumn. And since they were very astonished that somebody really went into the detail of the budget. And so I asked for explanation of the one figure and the other figure. And that was a real breakthrough because then they learned that also if you go into the detail, that you get really respect and understanding from the people who are drafting this. And if they see that you are looking into the details, that helps. And that was also my strategy in European Parliament. I brought always in a lot of amendments where I could change the budget conditions on the one or other side. And, you see over the 20 years that a lot of things have developed, like Commission President Barroso someday gave me a call and said, Paul, we have to create something like MIT in United States. But the whole research community and science community doesn't like it because then some money maybe is taken away from them. So we started to negotiate a fully new organization, the European Institute of Technology. And that's also a big success story. But today we have a budget of 3 billion euro for helping startups and the higher education sector to deliver better results within European Union. And I was very astonished that after my career in European Parliament, I was now asked to be in the governing board of this EIT. And so I now support the support of SME, startup and scale up and the education, entrepreneurial education in the higher education. And I fight for this quite heavy, and I do a lot of work now because I'm also was elected for the European Economic and Social Committee, where I'm now in the board of the employers. And therefore, I have now still a lot of options to be active in European legislation and budget. So overall, we have very good progress on these issues. They are not very much published in the media, but the activities are working and getting forward.
On the role of the European Parliament in the budget process, and gradually it got a lot of powers. Do you think that the European Parliament has enough powers, or should we have even more powers in the budget process of the European Union?
I think it's a big difference, and I learned in the regional parliament, in the national parliament, how budget is negotiated, and that's totally different on European level because the European Parliament is really working on any line of the budget. We can put amendments to any line and vote for it. And in the trilogue, of course, the questions which are not clarified before, you run through nights of negotiation between Commission and Council and Parliament. And last time it was where I was rapporteur for the budget. We had the finance minister from Austria, Mr. Löger, who was my counterpart in the negotiations. And I think it was also with the Commission a very good way of changing also large files of the budget, where European Parliament has really a say on how the money is spent. And of course, the Council has a real say on how much budget is put into the negotiations. So this 7-year framework, which we got now concluded, will play also a big role in the negotiations.
Because you can overlook now 3 or 4 7-year frameworks of the European Union. That's the budget process of the European Union. Can you see that there's improvement from the side of small and medium enterprises, that the EU has also budgeted more money for small and medium enterprises in the last 20 years?
Yes, you know, as an example, in the Horizon Europe program, we also pushed from the European Parliament to have minimum quotas on SMEs within the distribution of the money. And of course, there were a lot of negotiations also in the regional fund to see what we can do for SMEs. And of course, it has a lot of impact if you are sitting in different committees, because I also was sitting in the development committees. And of course, working together of small and medium-sized enterprises, especially in the rural areas outside of European Union, is also an educational aspect, which helps both sides to be successful. So if you go for SME interest in the budget, you have to run through all chapters and look in which chapters you could be from the best success and which options do you have to introduce your ideas.
The European Union is financed by the member states, by the 27 member states, and there was a big debate about the level of financing. And also because the EU is taking more and more tasks which are so important, like border security and other issues. And my question is now, do you think that we have enough money at the European level, or should there be more money transferred from the member states towards the European Union?
You know, European Union has approximately 1% of the GDP of European Union. As I was in European Parliament, we decreased this percentage from 1.09 to 1.01, and the latest figures were below 1%. We also cut the posts by 1% every year in European Union. So we had a heavy push on efficiency of the European organizations. But of course, the 1% is too less to run everything on a principle of sharing the activities. And so the question is, how can we prove to the member states that it's cheaper to do it on European level? So if you can convince member states that actions which we do together are much easier and cheaper on European level, then the budget could be increased. By the same time, the national budget is not doing the same again, so that you can decrease the expenses on the national budgets and put it into a more efficient level on European level. So if you compare with the United States, the European Union has a very, very small budget and is very, very efficient. So it's clear that also in the future, the debate on own resources should be led into a way that the own resources are at least deducted from the tax load from the national member states, so that for the taxpayers it could be run more efficient and with lower rates to have a better result.
Well, let me also ask you about the big debate between tax harmonization and tax competition. There is some talk about to have one unified VAT, the value-added tax in Europe, but also there is some kind of talk about having the same corporation tax, income tax. What's your opinion on this debate?
I think we always should start with definitions. So if we speak about the corporate tax, the real issue, what is the base for the tax? And of course, there are tax exemptions, and there's a lot of complicated ruling on this. So if we want to have a fair competition between member states, I think the tax base should be solid and with a clear definition for everybody. And then, of course, on how much you charge is also a decision on the political spectrum, because, of course, you have people who want to have as much as possible taxation, and the consumer have to pay for it. And the other ones say, okay, we want to lower the taxation as possible because it's in the benefit of the consumers. And so reducing tax rates and the competition on tax also gives an answer on the political spectrum. So if you want have high taxation, which have to be paid from the consumer, is a very important issue for the socialists and for the Green. If you want to deduct the taxation, it's a very good issue for EPP and the other groups. So the consumer has to decide if he wants to pay a lot to the public administration, or if it should be in his own area to give him the right to make the own decision and not being dependent on decisions of the public administration. So personal freedom and to decide what you do with the money which you have worked for is for me the priority, by fully understanding that there is also an efficient and good public administration necessary, that we can increase the wages of the public administration by decreasing the taxation for the one who are working. I think that would be a very good outlook for the future.
So do you think for small and medium enterprises, lower taxation and corporate tax is very important?
Of course, because if you want to pay your people a good wage, you have to decide either you put it to the taxation side or to the side of the employees. I'm fully for the employees. I want to pay higher wages, because then you get better qualified people and you could be much more successful in your company. So a low corporation tax is the base for a good development also in the social area, because if the business and the GDP grows, of course, it's easier to share than if the GDP falls down, then the sharing gets more problematic. So a low rate also enables you to have better investment. And if you invest into your company, building a new production facility, investing into new markets, at least the public will have a bigger share, which could be used for infrastructure and a lot of activities which are necessary. If you see that now we are lagging behind in laying fiber and 5G through Europe, I think it would be much more important to push into this infrastructure development. If you look how the highway industry is blocked, and on the other side, the high-speed trains are also not in the center of the debate. I think it's definitely necessary to show how these decisions will affect the personal life of everybody.
Of course, we have different member states in the European Union, new ones in Eastern Europe, also Central Europe, and then we have richer ones in Western Europe. What do you think, for example, for Austria or for Slovakia is the optimal level of corporate taxation?
I think that the 10% which we had in old times, where the emperor asked for a tenth of the agricultural result, a tenth is, I think, a fair base, but this tenth should be implemented in a way that no exemption and no other way is possible to get around it. So also for big international companies in the internet, I think the 10% maybe should go into a own box to make it possible to create also the backbone which they need, because also they need fiber and 5G to sell their products. So why shouldn't they also pay for this? So of course that's a question on the global area, and the key question is it possible to negotiate this in the G20 or on WTO level or wherever on United Nations level? I think a low taxation of the people who produce and to deliver goods and services, a low taxation is the base for having a higher GDP and giving value to the people. A high taxation leads to a very big public administration, which normally acts as a monopoly. And you know, monopoly is always against consumers. Only through competition we can get the best solutions for this. We have learned from Sweden, as an example, that they did a public procurement on the public transport only between their cities. So of course, one citizen thought, I can do the public transport from the other city as well. And so if I buy only 3 buses, I don't get so much rebate. If I pay 20 buses, it's much cheaper. I can be more flexible with the workforce. So Sweden also learned us out of the old socialistic system that if they create competition also between public authorities, because also in the administration we need more entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is not only something in private companies, entrepreneurship is also necessary in public administration. So if they create an open competition, a fair and transparent competition between public institutions, that really leads to a progress in the system, and we should be behind this.
Paul, there was now a new centre-right-wing former Minister of Finance from Australia, Matthias Cormann. He was elected as the Director General of the OECD, of the Organization for Developed Economies. And my question is now, do you have good hopes that he will be putting tax competition reform on the agenda globally, and also to be more countries part of the global market democracies?
Yes, you know, we see that the tax policy has a very important impact on the structures in a country. And if OECD can also give analytical advice in showing that this lower taxation brings better effort for the people, and OECD is very well equipped with research and science capacity, and communicate this in the right way to the governments, that would be very helpful. Because I think it's very easy to show the lever curve is still existing. You have to find the right threshold in which areas the taxation is doing the best effort. We also learned in Russia that also Putin has put down the corporation tax dramatically, and this really was a good decision for getting better results in the economic field. So it doesn't depend on a theory. I think it's necessary to prove that a low taxation is a big benefit for everybody.
On energy politics, Paul, let me ask you, you were one of the biggest promoter of European energy independence and have really invested very well in the European energy infrastructure, energy union as well, one of your big topics. And how is that now? Are you satisfied? Is it far enough? Do we have to go further in the energy transition? What's your policy on that one?
I think, like in the digital single market, we need an energy single market. And I think the cross-border activities have to be in the focus of our activities. And we all know if we run too deep in the renewable energy without having technical solution, we will get within short time a blackout. Yeah? Because if you see that Germany went out of nuclear and now out of coal, in both areas, a lot of taxpayers' money was invested, billions and billions. And if you only think that by sun and by wind or by water, you can run an energy policy where there is no blackout, that's, I think, at present not really possible. So we import every year approximately 400 billion euro on energy. So the key question is really how much can we do ourselves? Because the problem is not the 400 billion which we pay for fossil energy. It's the problems that say buy weapons and support military activities with these exports. And therefore, I think it's wise to try to do as much energy production within European Union and to see how the disinformation in this field also could be get to an objective and good information for our society. Also raw material, we import approximately 200 billion every year on raw material. So if we could produce it within the internal market, of course, it would be a big gain also for security in the global value chain. So I think European Union is doing a very good job on this. We have excellent people who are working on these value chains. But the truth is we have to trust them and we have to help them that these policies really could be achieved.
Really much is progressed on European Energy Union on the European level, but unfortunately some states are still buying much more energy from Russia, unfortunately. And here's also my question about Nord Stream 2, because maybe end of 2021 it's finished, and then there will be even more gas coming from Russia and we will be more dependent. So what's your opinion about Nord Stream 2 completion?
Yes, I think it's very good to have as many pipelines to Europe as possible, also as many as possible LNG terminals. So what we have to create is a real competition. If we have competition and on the same level for everybody who wants to import to European Union, I think that's the best solution for the consumers. We all know that Nord Stream 2 is a big investment and is also very good for the security of supply within European Union. But on the other hand, we have to make sure that the competition is working in the interest of the European people. So we have a lot of pipelines activities, and only a good competition within the energy market will bring fair and low prices to the consumers. So that's a clear message that the internal energy market has to be accepted from anybody who wants to import to European Union, from anybody. I had a long talk with the energy minister out of the Arabic Peninsula, and he said, Mr. Ruebig, we will make all pipelines within European Union if we can use it only for us. Then we would invest in all pipelines. So I said, Minister, sorry, that's not what we want to have. We want to have competition. And then he said, no, then we are don't building your pipelines. So you see, it's very easy to understand that for us, the interests of our citizens are in our heart. So delivering good solutions, I think, is the base.
Paul, about competition policy, because there is always a debate. Some people say competition policy is difficult for SMEs, should be more subsidies. Some people say SME policy is very much about very strict competition policy, that they have fair and open access. Where's your take on your opinion about competition policy and SMEs?
I think the most important point is that we should give them the chance to get rid of red tape. So I think we would need a own body in European Union who fights red tape efficiently, and that would be, of course, a base of being more successful. So we have to strengthen our education system. So especially the higher education and the vocational training has to be reformed and adapted to the new way of how to support the successful production and services. And therefore, the principles are so important in European life that from scratch we have to educate our people on their attitudes and their strengths. And we also should see how new personalized learning and teaching technologies could help us to bring better results.
Good. The question also about digitalization, because today in Corona crisis, we see that Europe is, some countries are very good prepared, like it's also in Romania, very surprisingly, very good in digitalization. Some countries are really like superstars, like Estonia, and some countries like Germany, surprisingly, is not so digitalized today. So you are the lifelong promoter of technology, digitalization. How do you see our situation today in 2021?
You know, I always tried that where the industry got a fair share on the distribution of the spectrum and the auctions which took place. I always was in favor to give the full money to the deployment into the infrastructure. But we failed in explaining to the finance ministers that this money would be the best return on investment. Now with the last auctions, it went better. So more money is now invested into these areas. And I think the network of infrastructure should have a top priority because also the electricity will also always only work in an efficient way if the control system is efficient, and that artificial intelligence and machine learning could help us to get the green transition to a digital transition as well. And I think that the priority of the commissions are very well organized, and that we should always have a good scientific base to see that not only the political targets are done by putting up your hand, because afterwards somebody has to do it. And if it's not possible to do it, the targets make not too much sense. So to break down this in real day-to-day steps, like the Japanese say, Kaizen, in day-to-day steps to improve our globe, I think that's a real challenge. And I thank you very much for the interview. I think it's good to communicate how we can do better. And therefore, Günther, I wish you all the best for your future, and many thanks, and hopefully you stay active.
Thanks a lot, Paul. I would like to thank you very much for the interview. Maybe one day to ask you as well about your water activity, because you do so much for water now, and this is really important. But now I would like to thank you very much for your time. And Dr. Paul Ruebig, thanks for everything you did for European SMEs and for global SMEs. Thanks a lot for your time. Ich hör's auf.